everyone. Happy Monday. After a week off, which we haven't had from me in a very long time, I am AnnaLee Dragon, and I am the director of the Kinderhook Memorial Library, and I'm back with another book talk. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to talk about this week. We are in mid to late October, and I thought I could do horror, but I know I don't have a ton of horror fans, and so I just thought I would do something a little personal for me this week. So many of you may not know, but my mom passed away at the end of December last year. And I've talked about her many times on my book talks because she is my literary muse, the person who taught me to love books and reading and opened my eyes to all of that. And her birthday was Halloween. And so we're coming up on that. And I thought maybe in honor of her, I would talk about some of the books that I knew she loved so much and have become kind of Dragon family favorites. My brother and I have both read and loved a bunch of these books. And I'm hoping maybe if you haven't read some of them, you will too. There is some fiction and some nonfiction, and they all hold a special place for me and maybe for you too. And if not yet, potentially they do now, which would make her so happy because she would have read anything you put in front of her face, but she did have favorites. And so in honor of my mom, Kathy Dragon, I'm going to do this book talk of some of her favorite books. So I'll put a cover up and then I'll talk about the book. And then at the end, I'll put all the covers again. They are all available in the Mid-Hudson Library System. Let me get my words together. It's a little early. And you can borrow them through us from all other libraries in the system, and some of them we have here. So I hope that you will enjoy this little personal book talk for me and find something great for you to read too. Okay, let's get started. I'm starting with a book that is a younger read for a lot of people, but one that my mother held very dear. It's called A Girl of the Limberlost by Gene Stratton Porter. So Gene Stratton Porter was a writer, an American writer, but also a naturalist, and this book was published in 1909, so it's very old, but it was one of my mother's favorites. My mom was a nature lover. She used to call herself a pagan because she just worshipped all things nature. And so that doesn't surprise me at all that this book was among her favorites. It was a sequel to Stratton Porter's book Freckles, but it's a lot more than that. And I never read Freckles, but I've read this one, which is a story of a second-generation settler girl growing up near the Limberlost Swamp, a vast northeastern Indiana wetland that was at the moment being busily drained for timber, farming, and oil drilling. So this is really a love letter to nature and to that part of the country. My mom was obsessed with all things pioneer. She loved Laura Ingalls Wilder's books. She actually lived with my father in South Dakota for a while. I think just trying to capture, she taught in a one-room schoolhouse, so I think she was trying to capture some of that. So a lot of things about this book spoke to her from a very young age. She grew up on Long Island, so not at all like where she grew up, but anything wild and, unexplored, and she loved Armchair Adventurer completely. So this book has very sweet and also very serious things, and it's clear that Gene Stratton Porter was a naturalist from her viewpoint and the way the characters speak about nature in the book. It is an older book, but I think that's really cool too, because you get a different viewpoint on where we were maybe as a culture at the time that it was written. If you loved Where the Crawdads Sing or The Signature of All Things, which I've talked about on book talks previously, I think this has a similar theme and tone to it in its adoration for all things natural. So it's more like the nature in it is like a character. So if you love those and you've never read A Girl of the Limberlost or Freckles, this might be a great book for you to check out and see if you enjoy it as much as she did. Okay, next book. My mom loved nothing more than a sweeping saga. Giant, big, fat books she always said were her favorite because you could live in them for a while and she didn't have to leave the characters so soon. So this book, Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett, is indeed a giant tome. It also became part of a series. He wrote other books later on, but at the time that we were reading it, this was the only one. And it's been made into a TV series, which I've heard wonderful things about. But this book I remember being intimidated by as a child because the size of it was so large. But once I got started, it just sucked me in, and it developed my love of sweeping sagas. So if you've never read Pillars of the Earth, it is the story of Philip Prior of Kingsbridge, a devout and resourceful monk driven to build the greatest Gothic cathedral the world has known, and of Tom the Mason, who becomes his architect, a man divided in his soul, and of the beautiful, elusive Lady Eliana, haunted by a secret shame, and of a struggle between good and evil that will turn church against state and brother against brother. It is a spellbinding epic. It talks about ambition, anarchy, absolute power, set against the sprawling medieval canvas of 12th century England, which, if you're into historical fiction, this is the watermark, like everything that it measures against this book, in my opinion. It makes you feel like you're there. There's part soap opera, part drama, part history. The people are so real and vivid, and I love that it doesn't kind of paint medieval times with this flowery brush that we tend to use a lot and think, oh, how romantic to live in castles. And it was a nightmare, and I don't think anybody should gloss over that fact. And I feel like he stays true to how hard and dirty and disease-ridden and just difficult to stay alive it was at this point in history. So I think it does all of those things while just drawing you into these characters that are, you just can't put it down. So even though it's giant, and if you're intimidated by that, I highly encourage you to just dip a toe in, and I guarantee you're not gonna be able to put it down. You're gonna want to finish it. So Pillars of the Earth by Ken Follett. Next book. Speaking of sweeping sagas, let's talk some Outlander. My mother read this whole series of books multiple times, and she said that it was one of the few books that she felt got better with each new edition, each new book that came in the series, because often the first or early books are better and they kind of trail off and aren't as great when you get further into them. But she swore that the later books were even better than the first book. And she read it multiple times and was just obsessed with the characters. She watched the television show, which I do too. And she got me sucked into it because I'm not much for romance a lot of times, but this has a little magic with the time travel, which she loved, some magical realism and maybe just magic in general. And it also has, this part of the world that we found fascinating, Scotland, England. And then there's the history of it, which was also fascinating, while wrapped up in a bow with, great characters, a good romance story, a love for the ages. So I think Outlander has all of the things, and I've talked about it in book talks before, but I couldn't leave it out of this talk because she never stopped talking about it and said how great it was all the time. And she's the reason that I picked it up to read it. She was my, if there was a book talk for AnnaLee, it would have been my mom. Whatever she picked up and read, and vice versa, we used to give each other books all the time. And Outlander was high among those. So if you have not read these books yet, you ought to pick up the first one, which is set in the Scottish Highlands. It starts in 1945, but there is time travel involved. So it goes back to 1743 and kind of goes back and forth. Multiple love stories, fantastic characters, beautiful settings, intrigue, war, all of it. It's got all of the things. So I highly recommend Outlander by Diana Gabaldon if you haven't checked it out yet. Next book. As much as my mom loved a sweeping saga in fiction, she also loved nonfiction, and so it makes sense that she would pick a sweeping saga that was nonfiction to really fall in love with. Wild Swans, Three Daughters of China by Yung Chang was a book that she talked about a lot. And I know one of our book clubs at the library read it at one point, so I know she wasn't alone in her love of this book. So it is the story of three generations in 20th century China that blends the intimacy of memoir and the panoramic sweep of eyewitness history. It's a best-selling classic in 30 languages, and it's got an introduction from the author. So it's an engrossing record of Mao's impact on China, an unusual window on the female experience in that world, and an inspiring tale of courage and love. So it's the extraordinary lives and experiences of the author's family members, her grandmother, a warlord's concubine, her mother's struggle as a young idealist communist, and her parents' experience as members of the communist elite and their ordeal during the Cultural Revolution. So again, like the fiction that we were talking about, it has all of the elements. There is politics and war and intrigue and love stories, but this one's real, which makes it all the more powerful, in my opinion, when something is real like that. And I do think it's really unusual to capture a woman's story in this world. Like, that's not something that traditionally would have been focused on. So, and this time you get not only one woman's story, but three women's stories. So I know my mother talked about this book a lot. I have not gotten to read it yet, but I plan on it. And I thought maybe you'd like to join me. Okay, so I have two more books for you. I'm sorry. We have one more nonfiction and then a Halloween theme book for you. Okay? Another theme that followed my mother's reading was she loved a good disaster, a good adventure and a good disaster story. I don't know what it was, but she didn't like scary as much, but she loved a good disaster adventure story. So this book, Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea. I think we can see where this is headed. It's by Stephen Callahan, and it was a New York Times bestseller. It's been out for a very long time. It was a riveting account of a harrowing month spent stranded, it's more than a month if it was 76 days, stranded at sea, and an incredible story of one man's struggle and bravery. So this is nonfiction, and Stephen Callahan, this is his own story. So he shares his dramatic tale of survival at sea in this undeniable seafaring classic. His engrossing firsthand account reveals how he survived more than a month alone at sea, fighting for his life in an inflatable raft with his small sloop capsized only 6 days out. It was absorbing and a must-have for any adventure library, which she definitely had. And the other thing to tie in here to my mom is that my grandfather, her father, was a sailor. And so she spent a lot of her time as a young person on the ocean. She always loved the water and boats. And so I think I was always a little confused as to why she was so eager to read this book, because it sounds to me like it would make me nervous to be on a boat again. And I have read this one, and it is harrowing, if nothing else. Makes you very happy that you're sitting on your comfortable couch reading it with plenty of food and water to drink and not out in the elements in a tiny raft. I think that's the thing. The ocean is this great equalizer. It doesn't matter whether you're on a giant cruise ship or in a tiny little boat or a life raft. You're no match for Mother Nature's power, particularly in the ocean. My grandfather used to say that you could sink a boat just as easily in sight of the land as you could in the middle of the ocean. So it's always a bit of a risk and an adventure, and I think maybe that's the part that spoke to her. But it is just a great book, a very crazy story, and unbelievable that he survived. But it is like the triumph of the human spirit, and he's very inventive and very creative, and I did really enjoy it. So if you look for either a good adventure or a good disaster story that has a good ending, this one does not have a depressing ending for a change, where some others do. So Adrift, 76 Days Lost at Sea by Stephen Callahan. Okay, I have one more book for you. I couldn't do a book talk for my mom around Halloween without doing a scary book. And so while she did not read a lot of horror, she did love Stephen King, and especially his older works. And I distinctly remember her talking to me about The Shining in particular. So my mom, for a while when I was a kid, had a second job as a bartender at this tiny little hotel bar right near our house, and it's called the Elm Hotel. And nobody was ever in there. It was a very locals place, and it was often dead, and she was the only person in there. And she was reading this book at night alone in the Elm Hotel, and I remember her saying she had to stop because every noise that happened, everything she thought she heard, she got so freaked out that she just had to stop reading it and read it at home because it was too scary, which I enjoyed because it is about a hotel, obviously, so and an abandoned hotel that nobody is in for the season. So it focuses on the main character, Jack Torrance, who has a job at the Overlook Hotel as a caretaker. He's for the off season when nobody's there, and he thinks, oh, he'll have time to spend with his family and his writing, but then a harsh winter sets in and it feels really remote and sinister. And it's very, like, there's some mental stuff that happens. I think this is the thing about this book. Stephen King writes a couple kinds of horror. Some are monster kind of horror, like It, and some are psychological terror, which is the kind that I always am drawn to, but also the kind that scares me the most, because it feels more real, right? There isn't an actual monster, but it's things that could happen to any of us, and that's what's terrifying about it. So The Shining is a classic horror novel. I'm sure a million of you have seen the movie, but if you haven't read the book, I would argue that the book is always better. And so you really should pick up The Shining by Stephen King for Halloween this year in honor of my mom. And don't read it in an empty hotel alone at night. Try it in your own living room. But I think it's a great book, even if you're not generally a horror reader, because of the psychological elements of it. It's just really fascinating and really great. And a good jump scare for you when you can just close it and put it away and know that you're safe at home. Okay, so that's all the books I have for this book talk about my mom and some of her favorites. And I hope that you find one in there that you enjoy as much as she did. Nothing would make her happier than to know that. And I will see you in the library soon, I hope. And I will be back in 2 weeks with another book talk for you. And we'll pick something fun. I'm not sure what yet, but we'll see. So if there's anything we can do for you, let us know. And otherwise, we will see you soon. Bye, everyone.